Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Heidi Alexander.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is in Italy and I've been asked to reply. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this government's leadership, the construction of social rented homes has fallen to a 20-year low. But since 2010, the amount of housing benefit paid to private landlords has risen by £1.5 billion. Does the Chancellor understand the connection, or would he like to come to my next advice surgery so my constituents can explain it to him?
Well, first of all, of course we're aware there is an acute housing shortage in London, which is why we need to build more homes. But I can tell the Honourable Lady this: we built more council housing in the last 5 years than in the entire 13 years of the last Labour government. And I'm very happy to come to Lewisham, where we will talk about the fact that today the claimant count is down by 25% over the year, and long-term youth unemployment is down 45% in the last year. The economic plan in Lewisham is working.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by congratulating the Right Honourable Gentleman on his appointment as First Secretary of State. It was reported this week that Talha Asmal, a 17-year-old from Dewsbury, blew himself up in an ISIL attack that killed 11 people. I'm sure the Right Honourable Gentleman will agree that we need to do everything that we can to prevent our young people from travelling to Iraq and Syria. So can he confirm whether the government now has an agreement in place with all of the airlines to raise alerts when unaccompanied minors travel to known Syrian routes, and that our police are being notified by the Turkish authorities when British citizens arrive at transit points to Syria?
Well, first of all, can I thank him for his welcome, and can I welcome the Right Honourable Gentleman to his place? I think his father would be extremely proud to see him leading for the Labour Party today. And can I say, speaking for this side of the House, we're extremely relieved to see that there's no Ben in the leadership contest opposite, but plenty of Benites. Now, when it comes to the very serious situation around ISIL, when he raises the very serious situation around ISIL, I think everyone in this House is shocked that a 17-year-old citizen of our country can become radicalised and become apparently a suicide bomber on the other side of the world. And of course, we've also got those distressing reports of the families from Bradford. So we are taking a number of steps. First of all, we want to work with schools and mosques and other community institutions to help prevent the radicalisation. There's a new statutory duty to do that. Second, we're working with the airlines, including getting in place those agreements that he talks about and providing the training at the borders to stop people travelling to countries like Syria, and indeed removing their passports if they attempt to do so. But third, and this will be an issue in this Parliament, we also need to make sure our security and intelligence services have the powers they need to track people who are trying to get back into this country, and I look forward to cross-party support on that issue.
Hilary Benn.
I'm grateful for that reply. I think the House would appreciate an update on the progress of those discussions with the airlines, and I noted that he wasn't able to respond to the question I asked about the Turkish authorities, because it's a very serious matter and we need to know where things have got to. Now, we know that for some time there has been a growing number of young people being groomed to travel to Syria and Iraq. Last November, the Intelligence and Security Committee criticised the government for not giving the Prevent programme sufficient priority and concluded, and I quote, that counter-radicalisation programmes are not working. Why does he think this is?
Well, frankly, I don't accept all of those conclusions, and there's been a disagreement about the Prevent programme. But frankly, I think in the past, there was a confusion between the programs that supported integration and the programs that tried to prevent radical extremism. And as a result, certain organisations got money that should never have got public money under the last government. So the PREVENT programme is doing its work. But we have passed a very important law in this Parliament that now ensures there is a statutory duty on these public authorities, like schools, like universities, like the police, to develop the PREVENT strategy and the counter-radicalisation strategy, because where I think we agree, and let's, after all, on an issue like this, try and find areas where we agree is we need to do more in these communities to prevent this radicalisation taking place in the first place.
Hilary Benn.
Can I assure the right honourable gentleman that he will, of course, have the full support of this side of the House in measures that are taken to try and deal with this problem. But can he assure us that community-led PREVENT programmes are now actually being implemented in places like Dewsbury and elsewhere, including providing appropriate training to teachers and other workers in the public sector as the new public sector duty that he's just referred to comes into force in 2 weeks' time?
Well, I can confirm that that training is taking place, and indeed we've provided additional resources. But in the spirit of this constructive conversation, we have an extremism bill, which was in the Queen's speech, which goes further in seeking to disrupt groups that are plotting to either commit offences here in this country or indeed to travel abroad and become further radicalised. I hope the Labour Party looks seriously at that extremism bill and offers its support to this side of the House.
Hilary Benn.
It's now clear that right across the Middle East and North Africa, the common enemy is ISIL. Does the right honourable gentleman agree that our strategic objective must be to continue to bring together all of the countries affected in the region and internationally to put aside other differences and cooperate to confront ISIL?
Well, I, of course, completely agree with the right honourable gentleman, and Britain plays a leading role in bringing together the various allies that are delivering the impact against ISIL, and indeed we have had some welcome news of prominent terrorist leaders, not necessarily in the ISIL organisation, but in other organisations, who have been killed in the last couple of days. And if those reports are correct, it's a very, very welcome step forward in the global fight against terrorism. But he's absolutely right. Ultimately, the Iraqi government and the Syrian people are going to have to find a way to take greater control of their own security. In Iraq, of course, we work with the legitimate government there. In Syria, we support the moderate opposition, and we continue to support and train them in the tasks that they undertake.
Hilary Benn.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, as more and more people gather in Libya to try and cross the Mediterranean, HMS Bulwark is doing an extraordinary job in rescuing frightened people. But we learned yesterday that its deployment is under active review. Having made a grave error last October in withdrawing support from the Mare Nostrum search and rescue operations, can the right honourable gentleman assure the House that the government will continue to save the lives of those in peril on that sea?
Well, of course, I can give him the assurance that we will continue to play our full part in the search and rescue operation in the Mediterranean. As I understand, there is essential maintenance that needs to be carried out on HMS Bulwark, which is clearly an operational issue. But no one should in any way doubt Britain's determination to play its role in helping with this situation. But can I end on this point, which in the end is this? Taking people out of the water and rescuing them and their lives, of course, is absolutely essential. And we're a humanitarian nation and we need to deal with that. But in the end, you have to break the link which enables someone to get on a boat and then claim asylum in Europe and spend the rest of their lives on the European continent. And that is the draw that draws these people who are aiming for a better life but circumventing proper immigration controls to the European continent. And I think we should work across Europe to break that link. And I look forward to his role in helping us do that.
Dame Angela Watkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tunnel boring part of the Crossrail project is now completed. The route will run through my constituency at Harold Wood. Would the Chancellor join me in congratulating everybody who's been involved in this most amazing feat of engineering, of which this country must be truly proud?
Well, I think my honourable friend rightly draws attention to one of the great engineering marvels of the world, which is this fantastic Crossrail tunnel that has been built up under one of the oldest capital cities on the planet. The honourable gentleman there says, how much did it cost? It did cost money, but I tell you what, this government is investing in the infrastructure to provide the jobs in the future. And if we weren't making the savings in the government budget elsewhere, we wouldn't be able to provide for our children.
Mr. David Lammy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's both...
It's all that hot curry, it's getting to you. Calm yourself, ma'am. Calm down. Bit of yoga would help. Right, Mr. Lammy. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today sees a mass lobby here in Westminster of people who are demanding urgent action on climate change. Since coal is the most damaging of the fossil fuels, does he agree that, as well as phasing out coal, we in this House have a responsibility to divest our parliamentary pension fund from fossil fuels, as they've done in Norway very recently?
Well, it's way above my pay grade to interfere with the parliamentary trustees of the pension fund here, and I leave the decisions on investments to them. But I would agree with the honourable lady that the lobby of Parliament is important today, and those Paris talks at the end of the year are a real opportunity to get a global commitment to binding standards and carbon targets. Britain's going to play its full part. What we want to achieve is the dealing with those greenhouse gas emissions, meeting our international obligations on climate change, but doing it in the cheapest way possible for the consumers of electricity here in Britain.
Johnny Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
This country faces a very simple choice. We've got 1% of the world's population, 4% of its GDP, but we undertake 7% of the world's welfare spending. Now, we can either carry on a completely unsustainable path, or we can continue to reform welfare so that work pays and we give a fair deal to those on welfare, and indeed a fair deal to the people, the taxpayers of this country who pay for it.
Order.
My old friend is right to draw attention to the success of these elections, which didn't, of course, exist before the Conservatives came into office. I'm not sure that his own election is the best possible example of this, since I think he's unelected and unopposed in his own election.
Well, elected unopposed, anyway. Yes. I think that's what the right honourable gentleman meant. Judith Cummins.
The Chancellor will be aware of the appalling incident this Thursday at Dixon's King's Academy in my constituency, where a pupil is accused of stabbing his teacher, Mr Vincent Azuma. I am sure that the whole House would wish to join me in expressing its shock at this horrifying incident, and also to wish Mr Azuma a swift and full recovery. Can the Chancellor tell the House what steps he is taking to tackle knife crime in our schools?
Well, first of all, can I say to the Honourable Lady, I think she speaks for the whole House in sending the sympathies to Mr Zuma and, of course, to the pupils and staff of that school. I think our hearts go out to them. I think the leadership in that school dealt with the situation incredibly well, and I know my honourable friend, the Education Secretary, spoke to the head. Of course, what we've done is given teachers now powers to search bags of pupils and the like, but if there are more things we can do as we learn the lessons of this incident, of course we will.
Mr Speaker, the right honourable gentleman referred to Tala Aslam from my constituency, who's alleged to have become the UK's youngest ever suicide bomber. Will the Chancellor agree to convene a meeting between myself and Home Office ministers to discuss a revisit and review of counter-terror policy, particularly with reference to tackling radicalisation?
Well, I know Home Office ministers will be very happy to meet the Honourable Lady and indeed her constituents. I think, of course, we want to work together to try and prevent other tragic cases like this one. And, of course, let's not forget the victims of the suicide bomb as well as the suicide bomber. And that is going to be a great generational task for us. It's clearly that the Islamic extremism and the radicalisation of our young people is not going to be something we solve in the space of a week or a month or even potentially in this Parliament. So we need to work across party divides. We also need to work with all the different public services to make sure we prevent these young people thinking that somehow their life or their death is better off on the other side of the world. First of all, I very much welcome my honourable friend to the House. Isn't it extraordinary that after 32 minutes of this session, not a single question from the Labour Party on jobs? And when an honourable member stands up to talk about the good news in his constituency, he gets shouted down by the opposite side.
Jim Dow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
This will be good.
Is the
If I might, Mr. Speaker, at the end of this session, since he raises a military matter, it is the 75th anniversary of the sinking of the HMT Lancastria. It was the largest loss of British lives at sea in the history of this maritime nation. Some of the survivors are still alive today, and many, of course, mourn those who died. It was kept secret at the time for reasons of wartime secrecy, and I think it's appropriate today in this House of Commons to remember all those who died, those who survived, and the families who still mourn them.
Order.